You've likely heard it before. You can't be happy without friends. But here's a controversial thought. What if that's not true, especially as you enter your 70s? Imagine this. What if, in fact, the key to true happiness is found within yourself? Not in the endless pursuit of socializing or seeking validation from others. When you stop chasing after constant approval from the outside world, something amazing happens. The pressure lifts. The weight on your mind and body decreases. You start to feel more relaxed, healthier, and more at peace. Is this something you agree with or disagree with? Let's dig deeper. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where we explore how Buddhist wisdom can help you lead a more peaceful and fulfilling life, especially in your later years. Now, I know this might sound surprising, even unsettling. Many people believe that in old age, friendships are a lifeline to happiness, but the truth is, embracing solitude, letting go of superficial social interactions, and connecting with your true self can be far more fulfilling. And these are lessons we often overlook in our busy, social-driven lives. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share could transform your perspective on aging. We'll explore 7 key lessons, all deeply rooted in Buddhist wisdom, that can guide you towards a more peaceful and fulfilling life after 70. These are lessons you might be missing every day. And today, you'll finally recognize them. But here's the part you really need to pay attention to. Part number 5. This particular lesson will unlock the door to a whole new life in your later years. One that's filled with freedom, peace, and joy you might have thought was out of reach. So, if you're ready to challenge old assumptions and embrace a life that's centered on inner peace, make sure to like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support fuels our ability to create more helpful videos for the elderly community, so we can keep spreading valuable lessons just like this. Let's dive in. 1. Letting go for a richer life. Ron, in his late 70s, had lived by a simple rule: to stay active, stay happy. For decades, he juggled friendships, attended every event, and was always on call for others. It felt like the secret to aging well: keep busy, keep connected. But over time, something shifted. The phone calls, the gatherings, the endless social obligations. What once brought him joy now felt like a weight he couldn't escape. He realized one quiet evening that he was no longer enjoying these relationships. They had become routine, draining him without giving anything back. He wasn't growing. He was just going through the motions. As much as he hated to admit it, he had been holding on to people out of habit, not love. It was a painful truth, but it was the truth. That night, Ron made a life-changing decision: to let go. He chose to walk away from friendships that had become empty, from people who no longer nurtured him. It wasn't about closing doors, but about freeing himself. He decided to focus on what truly mattered: his health, his happiness, and the few people who genuinely brought joy into his life. The change was instant. With every friendship he released, Ron felt lighter. The constant pressure of social obligations faded, replaced by a newfound sense of peace. For the first time in years, he was truly present. He poured his energy into activities that nourished his soul, things he had once forgotten in the chaos of keeping up with everyone else. This decision, this act of letting go, wasn't just a personal choice. It was spiritual liberation. In Buddhism, we learn that all things are impermanent: people, circumstances, even our own desires. Ron had embraced anicca, the understanding that holding on to what no longer served him would only cause suffering. By releasing these attachments, he made room for something far greater: authenticity, peace, and true connection. Ron didn't withdraw from the world. He simply embraced non-attachment. He stopped chasing approval, stopped letting outdated relationships define him. Instead, he began to invest in what truly aligned with his values. This, as Buddhism teaches, is the path to nirvana, the freedom from suffering that comes when we live authentically, without the burden of unnecessary attachments. Ron's journey was a quiet rebellion against the societal pressure to stay busy for the sake of being busy. And in letting go, he unlocked a life of peace and fulfillment, one that he could finally call his own. 2. No need to prove anything anymore. For much of his life, Chris believed that his worth was tied to the titles on his business card, the meetings he attended, and the colleagues who surrounded him. He climbed the corporate ladder, step by step, always seeking approval, always measuring his success by the validation he received from others. But when Chris hit his 70s and finally retired, something profound happened. He found himself surrounded by a circle of former colleagues, people he had once considered friends. Yet, as he looked around, he began to feel an unsettling truth. These relationships weren't real. They were built on convenience, on the shared experiences of work, not on deep, meaningful connections. Over time, those friendships began to fade, and Chris found himself grasping at straws, trying to keep them alive out of habit. It wasn't long before the realization hit him hard. All these years, he had worked tirelessly to meet the expectations of others, his job, his colleagues, even his family. But as the weight of those years settled in, Chris understood. He no longer needed to prove himself. The pressure that had been mounting in his chest for so long, this constant need to show he was worthy, suddenly felt like an unnecessary burden. For the first time in his life, Chris began to breathe freely. What he discovered next was liberating. He started to reconnect with things he had abandoned long ago. His hobbies, passions, and simple joys that had been crowded out by the demands of work. He no longer had to keep up appearances, no longer had to pretend to be someone he wasn't. He let go of the constant chase for external validation. And in that space, Chris found a profound sense of peace. This transformation echoed the teachings of Buddhism, specifically the concept of anatta, non-self. For so long, Chris had defined himself by his career and the approval of others. But by releasing those labels, he realized something powerful. His identity was not tied to his job or his colleagues. His true self had always been there, just waiting to emerge. For the first time, Chris felt whole, not because of anything he had accomplished, but simply because he had learned to be true to himself. As the days passed, Chris's body began to respond to this newfound freedom. He was no longer living in a constant state of stress, striving to impress people who didn't truly see him. The physical toll of years spent seeking approval, high blood pressure, sleepless nights, and anxiety began to lift. Studies have shown that prolonged stress damages the body, but as Chris let go of his need to prove his worth, his stress levels dropped significantly. For the first time in years, he felt his body relax, as if it had been holding its breath for far too long. Buddhism teaches the importance of detachment, the art of letting go of external pressures and expectations. Chris's decision to release his need for validation was an act of right effort, part of the Noble Eightfold Path. He was no longer bound by the expectations of others. Instead, he was living in alignment with his true self, focusing on his own happiness and growth. This alignment brought harmony to his body and mind, something he had never experienced before. As he embraced this new mindset, Chris found himself naturally practicing mindfulness. He learned to live fully in the present, no longer bogged down by the past or anxious about the future. Mindfulness, as Buddhism teaches, is the key to true peace. It allows us to connect with the present moment, reducing the mental clutter that so often leads to stress and illness. Chris's newfound awareness helped him focus on his breath, slow his thoughts, and release tension. With time, he noticed improvements in his sleep, his heart health, and his overall sense of well-being. What Chris experienced was more than just emotional relief. His body, too, began to heal. His immune system grew stronger, his heart more resilient, and his sleep more restful. The physical benefits of letting go of the need to impress others were undeniable. His energy returned, and with it, a sense of vitality he hadn't felt in years. Chris's story is a powerful reminder that the most important relationship we have in life is the one with ourselves. As we age, we often get caught up in trying to meet the expectations of others, but the truth is, we don't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. By letting go of the pressure to prove ourselves, we unlock a life of inner peace, freedom, and true happiness. This isn't just an emotional shift, it's a physical transformation as well. When we stop chasing external validation, we give our bodies the space to heal, thrive, and live with the vitality we deserve. Chris's journey is one that many of us can relate to, especially as we get older. It's a story of letting go, of releasing the burden of trying to prove our worth. And in that release, we find our true selves, whole, at peace, and ready to live the life we were always meant to live. 3. time is your greatest treasure. As we grow older, time shifts from something we take for granted to something we cherish deeply. For Harry, now in his early 80s, this transformation was more profound than ever. He had once been the life of the party, always the center of attention at dinner parties, outings, and phone calls. His calendar was a reflection of his vibrant social life, and for years these gatherings brought him joy. But over time, something began to change. What once felt exciting now started to feel draining. The lively events, once a source of happiness, had turned into obligations. Endless nights of small talk, superficial exchanges, and tired smiles. It was during one of these dinner parties, as he sat silently at the table, that Harry had a revelation. As the conversation around him blurred into noise, he realized something that stopped him cold. His time was far too valuable to waste. It was no longer something he could afford to spend on mindless interactions and social expectations. That night, Harry made a life-changing decision. He stopped attending events out of habit. Instead of rushing from one social obligation to the next, he began to reclaim his time. He embraced long walks in nature, curled up with books he had always wanted to read, and explored new hobbies that brought him joy. In letting go of the pressure to stay socially active, Harry found something far more fulfilling: peace. This shift was more than just about changing his routine. It was a deep recognition that time, especially as we age, is our most precious resource. In Buddhism, time is seen as fleeting and impermanent, just like everything else in life. The Buddha's teachings on anicca, or impermanence, remind us that nothing lasts forever. Time, too, slips away faster than we realize. It's a harsh truth, but one that Harry now fully understood. His epiphany was that he no longer had to fill every moment with activities that didn't serve his well-being. He needed to focus on what truly nourished his soul. This newfound wisdom was a powerful act of mindfulness, the art of being fully present in each moment. Harry stopped rushing through life, ticking off tasks and attending events out of obligation. Instead, he started savoring each moment, embracing the simplicity of walking, reading, and just being. With each step, he practiced mindfulness, aligning his actions with his values and honoring his time as the precious gift it was. Harry's decision was also rooted in the Buddhist concept of right effort, putting energy into what truly matters. By saying no to distractions and choosing where to invest his time, Harry embraced a life of purpose. The more he focused on what truly brought him joy, the more he felt a sense of fulfillment and inner peace. As Harry embraced the concept of nirvana, the Buddhist path to liberation from suffering, he realized that letting go of external pressures and distractions was the key to reclaiming his life. The constant need to stay busy, to prove his worth through social engagements, was a form of attachment that no longer served him. By stepping away from it, he freed himself to live a life that was truly his own. Harry's journey is a powerful reminder for all of us as we age. Time is fleeting, and how we choose to spend it matters more than ever. Buddhism teaches us that every moment is an opportunity to live with intention, peace, and fulfillment. As Harry's story shows, we have the power to reclaim our time, let go of unnecessary distractions, and focus on what truly brings us joy and inner peace. 4. True companionship starts within. At 76, Elise had always believed that happiness came from being surrounded by people. She spent her life organizing plans, checking in on friends, and staying immersed in social events. For years, it seemed like the key to fulfillment: keeping busy, keeping connected. But no matter how many gatherings she attended, no matter how many friends she surrounded herself with, there was a deep, unsettling emptiness inside her. Something was missing, something she couldn't quite place. One day, during one of her usual social gatherings, Elise had an epiphany. As she smiled through another round of forced small talk, she realized that despite being surrounded by people, she was still alone. Alone with her thoughts, her loneliness, and her unfulfilled longing for peace. The realization hit her like a wave. She had been seeking validation and connection from the outside world, but it hadn't brought her the peace she craved. In that moment, Elise made a bold choice. She decided to stop seeking approval from others. She chose to spend time alone, a decision that felt strangely uncomfortable at first. For most of her life, Elise had filled every moment with the noise of others, but now, she would face her own silence. At first, the quiet felt foreign, almost unbearable, but soon something remarkable began to happen. Elise started to enjoy her own company. She rediscovered the joy of reading, the peacefulness of walking alone in nature, and the deep satisfaction of reflecting on her own thoughts. Slowly, she realized something she had never truly understood before. Being alone didn't mean being lonely. It meant connecting with the person who had always been there, herself. This shift mirrored a powerful Buddhist teaching, anatta, or non-self. The Buddha taught that our identity is not defined by the roles we play or the validation we seek from others. Elise had spent her life trying to define herself through her relationships and social interactions, but once she let go of that attachment, she found something far more profound: true companionship found within. In releasing the need for external approval, Elise discovered that she was complete just as she was. Elise's transformation was also rooted in mindfulness. As she spent more time in solitude, she learned to be fully present in each moment, without judgment or distraction. Mindfulness taught her to embrace her feelings and thoughts, to connect with herself without the need for constant validation. This practice of being present, of living in alignment with her true self, brought her peace. Peace she had searched for all her life but could never find in the noise of the world. Through metta, loving kindness, Elise also learned to cultivate compassion, not just for others but for herself. By caring for her own needs, accepting her own worth, and embracing her solitude, she began to nurture a deeper, more authentic connection with herself. And in doing so, she found that she could also form more genuine connections with others. In embracing solitude, Elise discovered the path to nirvana, the cessation of suffering. The suffering that had come from seeking validation, from clinging to attachments, slowly faded away. As Elise released her dependence on external relationships for fulfillment, she found true inner peace. As we grow older, we realize that the most important relationship we will ever have is the one with ourselves. Buddhism teaches us that solitude isn't isolation. It's an opportunity for self-reflection, growth, and inner peace. Elise's journey shows us that true companionship begins from within. 5. Fewer friends, greater fulfillment. At 78, Jacob had seen many friendships come and go. Some faded naturally over time, while others, he realized, were never truly mutual. For years, he had been the one making all the effort, organizing get-togethers, making the calls, reaching out. But his so-called friends were often too busy or uninterested. At first, Jacob tried to ignore the hurt, wondering if it was something he had done wrong. But as time passed, a painful truth became clear. These relationships were based on convenience, not genuine connection. One day, after yet another unanswered call and canceled plans, Jacob felt a quiet but powerful shift within him. He realized he had been pouring his energy into friendships that didn't nourish him, friendships that left him feeling empty. It was time for a change. He stopped chasing after relationships that no longer brought him joy or fulfillment. Instead, Jacob focused on the few people who truly mattered. Those who gave him peace, those who valued him as much as he valued them. For the first time in years, he felt lighter, free from the weight of unrealistic expectations. His life began to feel more meaningful, and he discovered that quality truly mattered more than quantity. Jacob realized that the relationships he had been holding on to out of obligation were keeping him from living authentically. This epiphany aligned with a core Buddhist teaching, anicca, the concept of impermanence. The Buddha reminded us that everything, including relationships, changes. Nothing lasts forever. Jacob's willingness to let go of those relationships that no longer served him allowed him to accept that change is a natural part of life. By embracing this, he freed himself from the grief of holding on to what was no longer working. Buddhism also teaches the practice of equanimity, the ability to remain balanced and calm in the face of life's changes. Jacob's decision to stop forcing relationships that drained him was a reflection of this practice. As he let go of the weight of past expectations, he found peace and freedom, no longer shackled by the need for validation. In the end, Jacob discovered that by focusing on the few genuine relationships in his life, he could live more fully. Fewer friends? Yes, but far greater fulfillment. True companionship, he realized, isn't measured by the number of friends we have, but by the depth of those connections. 6. embracing life's new freedom. At 72, Anne felt a profound emptiness she could no longer ignore. For her entire life, she had dedicated herself to others, her children, her friends, her community. She was always the one to give, the one to nurture, to make sure everyone else's needs were met. But now, with her children grown and moved away, and her friends becoming more independent, Anne realized that, somewhere along the way, she had lost herself. For decades, Anne had been so focused on others that she had forgotten her own needs and desires. She had neglected the dreams she once had, the hobbies she enjoyed, and the simple pleasures that once brought her joy. It wasn't until this moment of reflection, when she found herself alone, that the weight of her self-neglect hit her. It was like a light bulb went off, and for the first time in years, Anne understood that she needed to live for herself, not just for others. Anne made a powerful decision. She decided to stop saying yes to every obligation that didn't bring her joy. She began to embrace the freedom of saying no without guilt. Instead of rushing to help everyone else, she said yes to herself. Yes to painting, yes to long walks in the park, yes to reading the books she had always wanted to explore but never had time for. This shift was nothing short of life-changing. For the first time, Anne felt a sense of fulfillment that had long been missing. She realized that she was not selfish for taking care of herself. In fact, her own happiness had always been just as important as anyone else's. This realization mirrored the Buddhist teachings of loving kindness, metta, and compassion, karuna. The Buddha taught that to truly care for others, we must first show care and compassion to ourselves. Anne's decision to prioritize her own well-being was an act of self-love, allowing her to live with greater peace and joy, free from the guilt she had always carried for focusing on her own needs. Anne's journey also reflected the Buddhist teaching of right intention, part of the Noble Eightfold Path. This teaching encourages us to live with goodwill, kindness, and the intention to free ourselves from suffering. By choosing her happiness and growth, Anne aligned her intentions with her true self. She discovered that when we make space for our own well-being, we become better equipped to care for others, not from a place of depletion, but from a place of abundance and inner peace. As Anne embraced this new way of living, she began to understand the Buddhist concept of non-self, anatta. For so long, she had defined herself by the roles she played: mother, friend, community member. But as she shifted her focus to her own growth, she realized that her identity was not confined to those roles. She was more than her titles. By releasing her attachment to the expectations tied to these roles, Anne found a deeper sense of peace and purpose. She began to live in alignment with her true self, not defined by the demands of others, but by her own values. Anne also discovered mindfulness, sati, a core Buddhist practice that encourages us to live fully in the present moment. Her time spent painting, walking, and reading became her personal practice of mindfulness. By consciously choosing to engage in activities that brought her joy, she embraced the freedom of being present, of living with intention. This practice helped her rediscover the happiness that had been buried for so long, allowing her to live authentically, free from the burden of others' expectations. As we age, we gain the freedom to prioritize ourselves, just as Anne did. Buddhism teaches that self-compassion and mindfulness are essential for a life of balance and fulfillment. By letting go of rigid roles, societal expectations, and attachments, we open the door to a life filled with authentic joy and contentment. Prioritizing ourselves is not selfish. It is a vital step toward peace, growth, and spiritual well-being. Anne's journey is a reminder that the most important relationship we have is the one with ourselves. By nurturing ourselves, we naturally enrich the relationships we have with others. When we care for our own well-being, we become the best version of ourselves, and in doing so, we create a life that is truly fulfilling. 7. Silence over small talk, the power of peace. At 74, Sophie found herself standing at a crossroads. For years, she had prided herself on being the life of the party, surrounded by friends, family, and countless social engagements. Her days were filled with lunches, group calls, and holiday get-togethers, experiences that once brought her joy. But lately, something had changed. The laughter, once vibrant and fulfilling, had turned into background noise. Conversations had become a blur of complaints and repetitive stories, and what used to bring her energy now left her feeling drained and disconnected. It was in a quiet moment of reflection that Sophie realized the truth. These social connections, once so precious, were no longer serving her. They had become a hollow routine. For the first time, she acknowledged that the constant buzz of social activity wasn't filling the emptiness inside her. It was just distracting her from it. Sophie faced an uncomfortable truth. She had been chasing external validation at the cost of her own peace. In a bold move, Sophie decided to stop living for the approval of others. She began saying no to obligations that no longer sparked joy, allowing herself the space to say yes to the things that truly mattered. She embraced the solitude she had long avoided. She took long walks, reconnected with books she had never had time for, and spent hours reflecting on her thoughts. To her surprise, what she discovered wasn't loneliness. It was a profound sense of peace. She realized she didn't need to fill every moment with chatter to feel complete. She was enough on her own. This realization echoed the wisdom of mindfulness, a central practice in Buddhism. The Buddha taught that true peace comes from being present in the moment, free from the distractions of the past and future. Sophie's attachment to socializing as a source of happiness had kept her trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction. Once she released this attachment, she found the inner peace she had been seeking. Sophie's transformation also aligned with the Buddhist concept of nirvana, the state of freedom from attachments and desires. By stepping back from the external demands of social life, Sophie embraced the stillness that allowed her to reconnect with her true self. This wasn't about withdrawing, it was about creating space for her own growth and happiness. Through samatha, or calm abiding meditation, Sophie learned to quiet her mind and let go of distractions. Her time spent alone became a form of meditation, allowing her to tap into a deeper sense of fulfillment. The silence no longer felt isolating. It was liberating. As we age, we often come to realize the true value of peace. Sophie's journey reminds us that happiness is not found in the rush of social events, but in the stillness of self-reflection. By embracing solitude with mindfulness, we reconnect with our inner selves and experience joy from within. Sophie found that peace, and in doing so, she unlocked a more meaningful and fulfilling life. Embracing the freedom to prioritize yourself is one of the most empowering decisions you can make in your later years. It's about shifting away from the expectations of others and investing time and energy into what truly brings you joy and fulfillment. Buddhism teaches us that true happiness comes from within, through mindfulness, non-attachment, and self-compassion. As we grow older, we have the rare gift of stepping back and choosing what truly matters, without having to explain or justify our choices. It's your life, and you deserve to fill it with the things that nurture your peace and happiness. So, have you started prioritizing yourself in your later years? Is there something you've always wanted to do but didn't have the time for? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your reflections. If this video resonated with you and inspired you to think differently about independence and happiness, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more content that empowers you to live life on your own terms. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to hearing how you plan to embrace the freedom of this next chapter of your life with a deep sense of inner peace and purpose.